and new books for fall 2014. This is a miscellaneous. It's got education, some philosophy, astronomy, and one economics book, which I'm almost finished. I guess I'll start with that one. This is Homer Economicus. This is edited by Joshua Hall. It's an anthology, so it's got many authors every chapter. And this is The Simpsons in Economics. And I must warn you, though, if you are interested in, first of all, you should learn economics, but this may not be the book to do it. This book is a little bit more academic. I would say that between a book for the public and a book for the university, this is somewhere in the middle. So it is a little bit higher language, but if you are a student or if you are used to academic writing, then this won't be a problem. But if you are only been reading fiction, for example, or popular, if you've been reading nonfiction, then you'll be fine. It just may be a little more difficult to read. But anyways, it's still good. It still uses The Simpsons. It still cites all kinds of examples. It teaches economics with The Simpsons, all kinds of principles that are fundamental to understanding how economics works and how certain political systems have problems unless they deal with economic realities. And so it's really a great book, and I'm almost finished, and when I'm done it, I will review it. So stay tuned for that. Now, a couple in philosophy. The Great Thoughts. This is by Seldes. This is essentially a dictionary, but it's of quotes, and so it's got Shakespeare in here, and it's got Malthus. Malthus, I think, was the guy who said that, the world's going to end because we'll starve to death because of population growth. That never happened, of course. It's kind of a similar thing that the environmentalists are saying now. It's got Caesar in here, and one person it has in here, which I was surprised to find, is Ayn Rand. She is quoted in here along with everyone else. And I just wanted to read you one of them. She's mostly quoted for her stuff on politics, but there was one quote in here that I thought was really interesting. It's from her Time magazine. She had an article in Time magazine, or it might have been an interview, and here's a quote. "The cross is the symbol of torture. I prefer the dollar sign, the symbol of free trade, therefore of a free mind." So that's pretty good, and that's from her Time magazine article, February 29th, 1960. So there's a nice compilation of quotations from all kinds of different writers. Here's another one in philosophy which I'm reading, The Making of the Social World, The Structure of Human Civilization. This is by John R. Searle. You may have heard of Searle, a philosopher. He deals a lot in cognitive science, but also some social philosophy. And he takes a more objective approach. A lot of people think that society is an illusion, or it's just a construct. It doesn't actually exist. It's just whatever we do and behave and act towards each other. Our customs and values and beliefs and all of this is just human creation. But he says no, they're actually rooted in the world, in psychology, and all things like that. He takes a more objective approach to dealing with social philosophy. He doesn't take the view that it's all relative and just all made up. So that's a refreshing point of view, because the real dominance right now in academic world is that it's all just nonsense and just trying to find ways to change it, and they don't appreciate it because it's just made up, or it's from tradition, so it's just prejudice and who cares. So this is a different take on the social world, though, and I've just a little bit into it. I don't know, maybe 15 pages in, and so far it's pretty good. Here's another book in philosophy of mathematics. Like I said in the biography video, I don't have very many books in mathematics, so philosophy of mathematics is perfect because I like philosophy. This is by Barker. This is probably printed in the 60s. Let me just see. This is 64. I am curious about philosophy of mathematics. I know they talk a lot about numeracy. What are numbers? What are quantities? And one thing that they grapple with is that when we talk about a quantity, for example, let's say we have 5 apples, which I just bought actually some today. In what sense can we call them 5 apples? Because every apple is a little bit different. In what sense can we equate one apple, plus one apple plus one apple, when each of the actual apples are of different weights, different sizes, maybe different colors? That may be one thing that the philosophy of mathematics deals with. In what sense is the number 1 and quantity and addition even meaningful? Because when we add things in the world, they're really not the same. They're really not equal. And is 1 equal to 1? And so mathematics has to stay in the conceptual realm because it is abstracting its numbers and its quantities, and when it adds and multiplies and all that, it must assume a perfect world and a perfect grouping of all these things together to possibly add them. It must assume that every apple you're adding together to make a group of 5 apples, it must assume those apples are the same. So that I'm not sure if that's one thing they might talk about, just the philosophy of numbers, of what is the proper basis of conceiving a number. Another thing that might be in here is interesting, and it actually comes out of some of the, looks like it goes through some history, actually, Euclid and the Greeks and all that, and paradoxes, it says here. But just something else I'll briefly mention, something else that might talks about conceptualization. That's the basis. It seems like mathematics is that. One thing I'll briefly mention is that another issue, and this actually comes out of Montessori, my study of her, is that there was a problem with teaching mathematics in that students would not realize that you were conceptualizing numbers. For example, she would use, I'm not sure whether they were marbles or there was something like that, and she would try to teach students addition and larger numbers through these marbles. And what they would do is they'd have one marble, and that's 1, and then they would take another marble and put it next to the other marble and call that 2. But for the students, they don't quite grasp that. They don't grasp that the whole is 2, not that there's one beside another one. The whole is 2. And one way she tried to do that, because what happens is the kids just think that they're separate ones just closer together. That's the problem. They don't conceptualize the numbers. They just see them. They see numbers and quantities still as just ones, just a whole bunch of ones. Here's a whole bunch of little marbles. They're all just ones. They're not 5 as a whole. So and that's the whole basis of mathematics, is this whole principle. And so what she did is she took rods. She took these wooden rods, wooden blocks, I guess, that had a rod in them, so a thinner rod that linked all these wooden blocks. And that helped the students conceptualize 5, because they could pick up the whole rod and say, look, I have 5 in my hand. There's a rod of 5. They're all connected. They're not just little ones of marbles that are disconnected. It's a rod of 5. So that was a way of trying to get students to conceptualize the quantity of 5 as a whole and not just ones close together. Anyway, so that's that. Some more books on education. Here's an Alfie Kohn book, The Case Against Standardized Testing, Raising the Scores and Ruining the Schools. So Alfie Kohn is probably more well known. He is a psychologist. I guess he's a psychologist. I'm trying to think. He might be more of a statistics kind of person. But anyways, he's more famous for his critique of rewards, external rewards, for the longest time, especially out of behaviorism and even into cognitive science. Psychology was preaching that if you want to motivate rats and you want to motivate pigeons with rewards, you can also motivate humans that way too. And we can give them extrinsic rewards. That means gifts or favors or something like that, some kind of external thing, some kind of thing they get or reward they receive for doing work, for doing schoolwork or for doing your chores or whatever that might be. You pay them for goals. If they play hockey and they get a goal, they get money or whatever to motivate them to do something, right? Or you give them candy or stars or whatever that might be. And Alfie Kohn had written a book called Punishment Rewards, where and I read this in my master's, which was in 2010, and he essentially was saying that, look, we have actually some data that shows that if you give these extrinsic rewards, you won't, first of all, wean them off the rewards. If you do take the rewards away, they won't do the task because they've always expected the reward. And this is a problem. This doesn't really learn them anything. This is merely temporary and in some cases damaging, because then now the students won't do it anymore because they've only been doing it for this reward. And so it's almost miseducative, because we want students to do certain things because it's a good thing to do. That intrinsic reward, maybe it makes you happier or whatever that means. Better marks, it's supposed to make you happier. You're not supposed to do that just because you get $5. And so he saw using extrinsic rewards as damaging. Now, his critiques of standardized testing is not as well known and probably not as sophisticated. He does say things like teaching to the test. He does criticize the assessment of what he calls high stakes testing. So high stakes testing is definitely exams, or basically the entire universities use these, like multiple choice bullet testing and things like that. He says that there are other ways of assessing students. You don't need to use these things. So anyways, I'm glad to have this. This is very short. I'm not sure if this is just a pamphlet version or something, but I figured the book would be larger. But certainly his Punishment Rewards book was a full book. This is just a very short, looks like 100 pages or something, 95 pages. So anyways, I'm glad to have it because I do like Alfie Kohn. Here's another book on education. This is by Steiner. It's called it's not by Steiner. Rudolph Steiner Education, the Waldorf Schools. This is by Edmunds, Francis Edmunds. I know that Steiner schools are more famous, more popular, more widespread in Europe. And Waldorf schools are more widespread in Canada and I assume the U.S. So Steiner definitely has a religious tinge to it, but they're similar schools. Waldorf schools, which I have visited, I actually did a little research project in some Waldorf schools, and I have visited maybe 3 of them. This was 3 years ago. Waldorf schools are actually arts-based schools. They're private schools, you have to pay tuition and all that. But they do run a curriculum. They do run the curriculum of the province or wherever you may be. So they do teach geography and they teach all that stuff, but they're very arts-centered. They're also very naturalistic. So for example, there's no technology in the classroom usually, not even a clock sometimes on the wall. Certainly no computer, no internet. They probably have a library where you can get the internet, but not in the classroom. Their backyards tend to be forested. Trees, wooden logs to sit on, very little metal. There's no play centers with metal and plastic, no way. Mostly just wooden, and the kids run around. I think there was some toys and stuff, but anyways, their classrooms are also very rustic, very like wood cabin-like. They draw on chalkboards. Every teacher is an artist of some kind. So the teacher is a good painter, singer, plays an instrument, a drawer, maybe, I don't know about literature, probably not. It's probably focused on some kind of artist. Every teacher. And so one of the classrooms I remember going into, the teacher had this amazingly done dragon on the blackboard in chalk. Just fantastic, just amazing. Some of the other teachers were singers, and they would sing every now and then to the students, like, I don't know, maybe once a day or something, but I'm not sure. But every single teacher, of course, had some artist inspiration. They have some skill. Another thing I'll mention briefly is that every student also on their desks had these little wooden trays with these giant crayons, like thick crayons, big crayons for their hands, I guess. Not the little crayons that we usually use, really thick crayons. And they would use those, and they would use them to draw and color their own things. They certainly were not coloring books. They were making their own designs and things like that. So it's very arts-based. They're trying to be creative. They think that to be creative, you have to practice drawing and things like that. Didn't work for me. But anyways, that's the Waldorf philosophy. And Steiner is related, but I think Steiner is more religious connotation to it. Okay, and one more book. This is actually on astronomy. Aristarchus of Samos by Sir Thomas Heath, the ancient Copernicus. So for the longest time, it was believed that Copernicus was the one who discovered that we were not in a geocentric universe, we were in a heliocentric universe, or at least solar system. Meaning, for the longest time, religious people, namely Christians, but basically all the monotheists, maybe the other ones, maybe Hindus, I'm not sure, in their arrogance, I guess, they thought that, well, we're the most superior beings on this planet, and God must have paid most attention to the creation of us, and so therefore this planet we're on must be also the center of the universe. Well, through pretty crude technology and mathematics, mostly mathematics, Aristarchus of Samos in the ancient Greek period discovered that no, we're not. This planet is not at the center of the universe. We're actually going around the sun. It is not the earth that stands still. It is the sun that stands still, although we know that's not the case now too, though the sun is, our whole solar system is also moving in a direction, just like our whole galaxy is moving in a direction. Everything's moving. But relative to the sun, we're the ones that are moving, not the sun. And I think that's amazing, because isn't it intuitive that we're here and the sun goes around us, doesn't it? We look up, we look in the east in the morning, and there's the sun, and at noon it's at the top, and then in dusk, in the later afternoon, and into the evening, it's on the west, and so it's moving around us, isn't it? But it's amazing how Aristarchus, and I'm really be interested to read. It looks like there's a bit of mathematics in here, and some diagrams and stuff like that of circles. It must have been really difficult, because not only are we spinning, but we're also moving around the sun. So that must have been hard to conceptualize, to figure that out, that we're actually moving around the sun, because we're spinning and we're moving around. So that may have been difficult to then predict. I'm not sure if the moon helped in that finding. The moon, I guess it should have been more intuitive, but the moon rotates around us too, but does that mean that also, I guess you could still make the case that, well, the moon wraps around us and so does the sun, so they're both moving around us. I guess you could still intuitively say that makes sense, but anyway, somehow with mathematics, Aristarchus discovered that no, we're actually moving around the sun. The sun is not moving. So I'll be really interested to hear more about that. I think we're finding more and more that the ancient Greeks knew a lot more than we think, and apparently they even had all the principles to build a steam engine, but they didn't make one, but they could have. And there's this thing about Greek fire. They had like kind of early gunpowder, or maybe a better way to putting it would be early like flamethrowers. There's all kinds of stuff the ancient Greeks discovered. It's just amazing how that happened, because I know of one author, Victor Davis Hansen, said of the Greeks that they were an anti-Mediterranean society. They were not a common Mediterranean society. They were something very different. And it's just amazing what they had covered with such primitive technology. The beginning of philosophy was there, beginning of science was there, just taxonomy and biology started there, just everything. It seems like everything started in the ancient Greek period. Even religions, essentially cults, were started in there. Of course, they had historical lineage before that, but it's just amazing. I think one can learn a lot just from studying the Greeks. And I also think that the ancient Greeks are one thing that if we were to forget would be horrible, I think, for civilization. And the reason why I say that is because in other videos I've said that I think we're losing knowledge. I think we're forgetting things. I think academics and intellectuals of today are not as well read as people in the past. So I am worried about that, because not only because of that fact, but also because it's becoming harder to be well read because of how much material is produced. You could be a Renaissance man in the past because you could master material. You could be a Francis Bacon and be an expert in many things. But with the advances there are today and just the vast quantity of knowledge there is today, can you be an expert in many things, even more than one thing? It's becoming harder and harder. And that has given rise to the rise of specialists, which study more and more narrowly something. But someone has to integrate all those things. We can't continue in the world with all these very narrow, pigeonholed specialists that have no idea what one another are doing, but are focusing on their little piece. Someone has to make sense of what they're doing in a grander, more worldly scheme, or a bigger picture, I guess you could say. Okay, that's it for books, miscellaneous books for fall 2014.